Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. And, today we're going to be tackling something maybe a little bit different.
Oh.
Yeah, different in a good way, though, I think.
Okay. I like different. Good different.
Good different, right? Yeah, so we're diving into the world of failure today.
Okay.
Using the book, The Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well by Amy Edmondson.
Interesting.
And we're really going to try to answer the question, how can we turn setbacks into opportunities to grow? So
He's fascinating, isn't it? Because, we often talk about failure as this big, scary thing.
right.
But just like investments, I mean, think about it. You've got your low-risk bonds, and then you've got venture capital funds. Failures, they come in different flavors, too.
Okay. Different flavors of failure. All right. I'm listening. I'm all ears.
Yeah, so Edmondson, she highlights three distinct types.
Mm-hmm.
Intelligent failures, basic failures, and then complex failures.
Okay.
So let's start with the good kind, the intelligent failures.
A good kind of failure. I did not know that existed.
Oh yeah, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
So intelligent failures, those are the ones that happen when you're pushing boundaries and you're experimenting in uncharted territory. Those are the aha moments where something doesn't work, but in the process, you're discovering valuable information.
Oh, okay. So when I tried to make homemade pasta for the first time, and it was a total disaster, dough everywhere. But, I learned a lot about gluten and hydration, which actually helped me become a better baker in general.
Exactly. That's a perfect example.
Okay.
You took a risk, calculated risk. It didn't work out, but you gained some valuable knowledge.
Yeah.
That's the essence of an intelligent failure.
Okay. So that makes a lot of sense. And Edmondson, she talks about intelligent failures being really important in science.
Right. Because think about it. In science, you have a hypothesis, and then you're testing it.
Right.
And if the data doesn't support it, it's not a setback.
Right.
It's an opportunity to learn and refine your approach.
Okay.
And she even shares the story of Dr. Jennifer Himstra, who's a scientist, and she actually encourages intelligent failures in her lab.
Oh, wow.
They even have a failure wall to celebrate experiments that didn't work out but led to new discoveries.
I love that, a failure wall. So we've got the intelligent failures. Now, what about the ones where you kind of hit your head and you're like, oof, I knew better. What are those?
Those are basic failures.
Okay.
Those are the slip-ups we make in situations where we already know what to do. Like, forgetting a meeting, or in a more extreme case, Edmondson, she gives the example of a bus driver who causes an accident because he's holding shopping bags between his feet.
Oh, wow. Yeah, okay, that's definitely a basic failure.
Right. And thankfully, those are often preventable.
Okay.
Think about checklists like pilots use before takeoff.
Right.
They're designed to minimize the risk of those preventable errors.
Okay.
So basic failures can be reduced through awareness, systems that catch errors, and just taking that extra moment to double check.
Okay, so that's intelligent failures and basic failures. What's the third one?
The third one are complex failures.
Okay.
Those are the ones that can be really challenging to unravel because they involve multiple factors converging to create a failure, often with those unexpected consequences that are really hard to predict.
Okay, this is like a perfect storm kind of thing.
It is, yeah.
Okay, can you give me an example?
So think about the tragic collapse of the Champlain Towers South Condominium.
Right.
So you had seemingly small cracks in the concrete, right?
Right.
Then you had deferred maintenance, and then also environmental conditions.
Right.
So all these factors kind of came together to create that catastrophic event.
It's like a domino effect. One thing leads to another.
Right.
And it's almost impossible to pinpoint a single cause.
Right. And so what happens in those situations?
We're going to start pointing fingers.
Exactly.
Yeah. Great.
But Edmondson, she argues that blaming individuals, it might feel satisfying in the moment.
Yeah.
But it often prevents us from actually seeing the bigger picture.
Okay.
And understanding that complex web of factors that are really at play.
And she uses Ashley to illustrate this point, right? She lost her husband in a diving accident.
Right. So instead of focusing on who was to blame, Ashley, she chose to really delve into those contributing factors that led to the accident.
Right.
This approach, while it was painful, it ultimately provided a deeper understanding.
Right.
And I imagine a sense of closure.
Wow. Yeah, so it's about understanding complex failures as systemic issues rather than individual mistakes.
Right.
And speaking of systems, Edmondson, she uses a business school exercise called the beer game to really show how seemingly isolated decisions can have ripple effects throughout an entire system.
That's a great example.
Can you explain that a little bit more for me?
Yeah, so imagine you're part of a supply chain for beer.
Okay.
So you've got the factory, the distributor, the wholesaler, and then finally the retailer.
Right.
Each player makes decisions about how much beer to order based on their perceived demand. Now, even a small delay or miscalculation at one point in that chain, it can create huge problems down the line, like overstocked warehouses, empty shelves.
Right, frustrated customers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a great example of how even small actions can have these unintended consequences within a larger system.
So it's really applicable to so many aspects of life.
It is, yeah.
Not just business.
Right. It reminds us to consider the broader context and potential consequences of our choices.
Okay, so we've got these three types of failure: intelligent, basic, and complex.
Right.
We've talked about dangers of blame and the importance of systems thinking.
Right.
But how do we actually get better at failing well?
Well, it starts with a fundamental mindset shift.
Okay.
We need to reframe failure as a learning opportunity, not something to be feared.
I love that.
Or shamed of.
It's like that Thomas Edison quote, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work."
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about seeing those setbacks as valuable data points, not personal shortcomings. And Edmondson, she talks about Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset, the belief that our abilities are not fixed, but they can be developed through effort and learning from mistakes.
So instead of getting discouraged by setbacks, we can actually use them to grow and improve.
Exactly. And she shares the story of Jeffrey, who learned to overcome his fear of failure in bridge.
Bridge?
Yes, bridge, the card game.
Wow, how did he manage that?
Well, he learned to view mistakes as just an inevitable part of the learning process, especially in a game as complex as bridge.
Right.
He focused on improvement rather than perfection.
Okay.
And he would use each mistake as a chance to analyze his strategy and just get better.
That's a really great example of reframing failure as a learning opportunity.
It is.
So shifting our mindset is key. What are some other practical things we can do?
Well, she emphasizes the importance of owning our mistakes.
Okay.
But she distinguishes that from dwelling in shame. It's about acknowledging our role in a failure without letting guilt paralyze us.
So taking responsibility, but not beating ourselves up about it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And she talks about crafting effective apologies, ones that focus on the impact of our actions on others.
Right.
Allowing us to take ownership without getting stuck in that cycle of self-blame.
Right. And that ties into the story she shares about the school principal who receives an honest email from a staff member.
Right. And it highlights the importance of feedback, even when it's uncomfortable.
Right.
And the power of creating environments where people feel safe to speak up.
Creating that psychological safety is so important.
It is.
We miss so much when people are afraid to speak up about mistakes or problems they see.
Absolutely. Psychological safety is essential for a culture of failing well to thrive.
It's about fostering a climate where people feel comfortable taking risks, sharing their learnings, iterating on ideas without that fear of being punished or humiliated.
Exactly. And that can lead to some incredible innovation and growth.
Yeah, I imagine. And she mentions companies like Google X and Tata that actually reward intelligent failures.
They do.
Because they understand those failures are often stepping stones to those big advancements.
Exactly.
Wow, rewarding failures. That's pretty radical.
It is, yeah.
I'd love to hear more about how those companies approach it.
Yeah.
And how we can advocate for similar initiatives in our own workplaces. But before we dive into that, what stands out to you as like the most important thing we've discussed so far?
It's the idea that failure is not the opposite of success. It's a vital part of it.
It's not about striving for perfection, but about embracing that process of growth.
Yeah, and recognizing that our greatest learnings often come from those moments where we stumble and then have to find our way back up.
Right. It's about creating environments where people feel safe to experiment, share their ideas, and even fail knowing they're not going to be penalized for it.
Right.
And you mentioned Google X and Tata before as examples of companies that actually reward intelligent failures.
They do. They do.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how they actually do that?
Well, it might seem counterintuitive.
It does.
But it's about sending that clear message that taking those calculated risks and learning from them is highly valued.
So do they have like a best failure of the month award or something?
Maybe not best failure awards, but they definitely have systems in place to recognize and even incentivize intelligent failures.
Oh.
For example, at Google X, they have a process they call pre-mortems.
Pre-mortems, before the project even starts.
Yeah, before a team even begins working on a project, they get together and they imagine that the project has failed spectacularly.
Oh, wow.
And then they brainstorm all the reasons why it might have failed.
So it's like a proactive way to think about what could go wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It encourages them to think critically about those potential risks.
Right.
And to develop some mitigation strategy.
Okay, so it creates that environment where people are comfortable voicing concerns. What if scenarios
exactly.
without being judged.
Exactly.
Okay, and how about Tado? What do they do?
So they have a program called Dare to Try.
Okay.
Where employees can submit proposals for innovative projects. And even if the project doesn't succeed in the traditional sense, if the team can demonstrate that they've learned valuable lessons from the experience, they can still be recognized and rewarded.
So it's not about punishing failure. It's about celebrating the learning that comes from it.
Exactly.
They're saying, hey, it's okay to take risks. It's okay to fail as long as you're learning and growing from the experience.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message to send, not just in companies, but in any organization or team.
How can we advocate for this kind of culture in our own workplaces?
It starts with small steps. Maybe it's sharing an article about Google X's pre-mortem process with your team. Or suggest a brainstorming session to identify those potential risks for an upcoming project.
So start small. Lead by example and gradually shift the mindset towards embracing failure as a learning opportunity.
Exactly.
We're not expecting everyone to just be comfortable with failing. But create that space where it's okay to talk about it, learn from it, and use it as a way to grow.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a culture that values learning over perfection.
Now, this talk about rewarding intelligent failures makes me think about leadership. What role do leaders play in creating this kind of environment where it's safe to fail?
Leaders play a huge role because they really set the tone for the entire organization. Their words and their actions shape how failure is perceived and handled.
It's not enough to just talk the talk. You got to walk the walk, too.
You do. And Edmondson, she gives several examples of leaders who've done this really well. For example, she talks about Paul O'Neill, former CEO of Alcoa. And he surprised investors at his first press conference. By focusing on worker safety.
How does that tie into failing well?
Well, because he understood that a culture of safety where people feel comfortable reporting errors and near misses ultimately leads to better performance in all areas.
So prioritizing safety means prioritizing transparency and learning from mistakes.
Exactly. And it's not just about preventing accidents. It's about fostering a culture of continuous improvement. And she also highlights Alan Mulally, who led Ford's turnaround as a prime example of a leader who fostered this culture of transparency and accountability.
Oh, yeah, I remember reading about that. Didn't he have that color-coded system?
He did, yeah.
For executives to report progress.
Yeah, it was brilliant.
And challenges.
It was a system that used green, yellow, and red to indicate the status of different areas. And this made it okay for executives to admit when things weren't going well. When we're hiding problems.
Wow, that must have taken a lot of courage for those executives.
It did.
Especially in a high-pressure environment like the auto industry.
It did, yeah.
But I can see how that would lead to a more honest and collaborative way to problem solve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as a result, Ford was able to identify and address issues more effectively. Leading to that remarkable turnaround.
So it seems like creating this culture where failing well is the norm requires this kind of multifaceted approach.
It does.
We need to reframe failure, build psychological safety, and promote systems thinking. And it's all driven by those leaders who are actually walking the walk.
Exactly. And let's not forget the importance of understanding how systems themselves can actually contribute to failure. It's easy to focus on those individual mistakes, but sometimes the system itself is set up in a way that makes those mistakes more likely.
Can you give me an example?
Yeah, she uses the example of workarounds in hospitals.
Okay.
So when nurses encounter a problem with a process, they often find ways to work around it to get things done. Seems like a good thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But here's where systems thinking comes in. So while those workarounds might solve the immediate problem, they often mask underlying issues with the process itself.
Okay.
So the problem keeps recurring, and nurses get stuck in this cycle of workarounds.
Yeah, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a wound that needs stitches.
Exactly.
Right, addressing the symptoms, not the root cause.
Exactly, and it's only by stepping back and analyzing the whole system.
Right.
Identifying those recurring workarounds that you can actually identify the root cause of the problem.
Right.
And implement a permanent solution.
Which brings us back to psychological safety, right?
It does.
Because if those nurses don't feel safe to speak up about those workarounds, those problems might never get solved.
Exactly.
It's about empowering people to be active participants in shaping the systems they work within to identify problems and contribute to solutions.
Right.
And to do that, you need that culture that values learning from mistakes, encourages open communication, and rewards intelligent failures.
Right.
Failing well isn't just about individuals.
Right.
It's about creating those systems and cultures that support and encourage learning and growth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's recognizing that we're all part of larger systems and that our actions, even those that seem small, can have those ripple effects.
We talked about how important it is for leaders to walk the walk when it comes to failing well.
Right.
But how do we balance this idea of encouraging risk-taking with the reality that not all failures are created equal?
That's a great point.
There's a difference between an intelligent failure and a reckless one.
Right. She emphasizes being thoughtful and discerning when taking risks. It's not about encouraging people to be careless or reckless.
So how do we know if a risk is worth taking or not?
Well, she suggests considering both the degree of novelty or uncertainty and what's at stake. It's about assessing those potential benefits against the potential consequences of failure.
It's like investing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You wouldn't put all your money in a high-risk venture if you couldn't afford to lose it.
Right. You weigh the pros and the cons.
Exactly. You make those informed decisions.
Yeah.
You understand the potential risks and rewards.
Right.
And you have a plan in place to mitigate those risks.
And sometimes even with the best planning, things just don't go our way.
They don't. And she actually shares this fascinating anecdote about Coca-Cola's launch of Dasani bottled water in the UK.
Wait, wasn't bottled water already a thing in the UK?
It was, yeah.
What went wrong there?
So Coca-Cola, they assumed it'd be a straightforward kind of execution. Like their success with Dasani in the US.
Right.
But they failed to really understand how bottled water was perceived in the UK market.
So even when we think we're operating in known territory, things can still go wrong.
Absolutely.
So what do? Do we just accept that failure is inevitable and hope for the best?
Well, it's not about hoping for the best. It's about embracing that uncertainty rather than trying to control every variable.
So being adaptable.
Right.
And willing to change when we need to.
Exactly.
So have a plan, but be flexible.
Exactly.
Learn as we go.
And to be fair, Edmondson herself acknowledges that failing well isn't always easy.
It's not, no.
It takes a combination of mindset, skills, and supportive environments.
It does, but she also emphasizes that it's a journey worth taking. Because in the end, failing well isn't just about avoiding mistakes. It's about embracing that process of growth and discovery.
It's about cultivating that mindset, where setbacks are seen as opportunities to learn and adapt. And emerge stronger and wiser.
Yes. And speaking of embracing failure and emerging stronger,
Yeah.
she ends the book with a story about Barb and Nicole Clicquot-Ponsardin, the legendary Veuve Clicquot.
We're the champagne lady?
Yeah, the champagne lady.
What does she have to do with failing well?
Well, she is a perfect example of someone who embraced failure and persevered through incredibly challenging circumstances.
And ultimately revolutionized the champagne industry. Her story is a testament to the power of resilience and adaptability.
Tell me more.
Well, she took over her husband's wine business at just 27 after he passed away.
Oh, wow.
This was in the early 1800s.
Right.
A time when women were rarely involved in business, let alone leading them.
That must have been so challenging for her.
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
She faced so many obstacles. War, political upheaval, trade embargoes. All these things threatened to cripple her business, but she didn't give up.
Wow.
She was constantly innovating, experimenting, finding ways to overcome those challenges.
So she was a master at failing well.
Yeah, you could say that one of her most significant innovations was developing the riddling process, which revolutionized the way champagne was made and helped create the clear, sparkling wine we know today.
Wow.
But even that process involved a lot of trial and error and experimentation.
Of course.
And yes, a lot of failures along the way.
Wow. Her story is so inspiring.
It is.
Yeah. It makes you realize that even when things are tough, failure can be a springboard for innovation and success.
Right. And it's not just about achieving our own individual goals.
Right.
It's about creating a world where failure is seen as a badge of courage.
I love that. A badge of courage. Because it does take courage to try new things and risk failure.
It does.
But as we've seen from all these examples, that courage to fail well is often what leads to the most extraordinary breakthroughs.
It is.
Wow. It's incredible to think about Veuve Clicquot and all she accomplished.
Yeah.
Especially in a time when women in business were almost unheard of.
Right.
She really shows us that failure isn't the end.
It's not, no.
It can actually help us grow and come up with new ideas.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that this whole idea of failing, well, it's not just some trendy new thing.
Right.
It's a principle that's been around for a long time.
Yeah, and it's been helping people make progress for centuries.
It has.
Okay, so we've talked about a lot today.
We have
different types of failure, the problem with blame, the importance of seeing failure as a chance to learn, building psychological safety, systems thinking.
Right.
And how important it is for leaders to set a good example.
Right.
But what can you do differently now that you know all this?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is.
Because it's not just about understanding these ideas. It's about actually using them in your own life.
So taking all these insights and using them to be more resilient, more creative.
More successful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's a process, right?
It is.
It's not like there's a magic formula to suddenly become a master at failing well.
Right. It's about developing a mindset.
Right.
A set of skills and just being willing to embrace those stumbles along the way.
And surrounding yourself with good people.
Yes, absolutely.
People who will support you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
People who encourage you to take those risks and who help you learn from your mistakes.
And who celebrate your successes.
Exactly. Even the small ones.
Even the small ones. That's so important.
It is.
Having those people around you makes all the difference.
It does.
Okay, so it's about creating that culture of support for yourself and those around you.
And ultimately, it's not just about achieving our own individual goals.
Right.
It's about creating a world where failure is seen as something positive.
A badge of courage.
A badge of courage, yeah.
It does take courage.
It does.
To try new things and risk failure.
Absolutely.
But we've seen today that courage to fail well can lead to amazing things. It can lead to breakthroughs and achievements.
It can.
So as we wrap up today, think about your own experiences with failure.
Right.
What have you learned?
How can you use these ideas to face future challenges?
Yeah, and remember, the next time you come face to face with a failure, take a deep breath, remember Veuve Clicquot, and ask yourself, what can I learn from this?
Right.
How can I use this to move forward?
It's about turning those setbacks into stepping stones.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
So to everyone listening, keep learning.
Keep growing.
Keep failing well.
And keep weaving your own unique story.
I love that. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.